So the story is that in today's video, what I really want to talk about is the fact that President Donald Trump has recently announced a lot of his brand new plans in order to try to implement tax cuts inside of our country. Now, I think it's really important to maybe really clarify is that back during his very first presidency in 2017, there were already several tax cut policies that he actually already approved and had happen throughout his entire campaign. Well, the story is that because a lot of the tax cuts that he approved back in 2017 are now set to expire by the very end of this year. So the goal is that he wants to essentially extend those tax cut policies that he's already had, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But he also wants to essentially try to implement brand new tax policies, so tax cut policies that he's trying to now get approved inside of Congress. So in today's video, what I really want to talk about is pretty much really just summarizing what are these brand new tax policies, maybe giving a little bit of insight about my personal thoughts about them. So even if you've seen another video about this, maybe hopefully you'll get something unique out of this video as well, since every single video I think is going to give its own perspective on it. And I also just want to explain maybe a little bit about what's going on in just the world of taxes in general. So hopefully if this sounds confusing, it's going to make a lot more sense by the very end of this video. But before we begin, I do want to maybe start by sharing this one video, which some of you guys maybe have already seen, but if you guys haven't seen it yet, I'll play it right here. If you guys have already seen it, feel free to just skip 30 seconds into this video. There's going to be timestamps on the bottom, so you can kind of skip around if you guys are interested. But I do try to make every single minute relatively important. So with that being said, this is the video.
So these are the tax priorities of the Trump administration that the president has laid out for members in that meeting today. No tax on tips, which is obviously a very public campaign promise that the president made. No tax on seniors' Social Security. No tax on overtime pay. Renewing President Trump's 2017 middle-class tax cuts. Again, these are the president's priorities. Adjusting the SALT cap, eliminate all the special tax breaks for billionaire sports team owners, close the carried interest tax deduction loophole, tax cuts for Made in America products. This will be the largest tax cut in history for middle-class working Americans. The president is committed to working with Congress to get this done.
So based off of this video, essentially what this is that it highlights directly from the press secretary, so Donald Trump's press secretary, his specific goals that he's hoping to try to implement when it comes to these specific tax cuts, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So like always, before we begin, if you guys enjoy videos like this, like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, because we will be making more videos about Donald Trump, his policies, and everything going on in the news. So to get notified immediately as soon as you can, subscribe, hit the bell, and let's get started. So now that you guys have seen that video, this is a post directly from the White House X/Twitter page, really highlighting and summarizing that video, talking about all the different points and the ideas that he wants to essentially implement during his time over the next couple of months, or as soon as he can, he wants to essentially approve these specific tax policies. But the first one is really going to be talking about tips. Essentially, what he wants to do is as one of his first policies, and there's so many, by the way, there's so many, but these are basically the big ones, is that he wants to essentially make it so that there are no taxes on tips. And this is one of those policies that if I had to share my personal opinion, is that I think it would be a really great thing, but feel free again, as we're going through all of these topics, to comment down below what you personally think about each of these different policies, because there's going to be a lot of opinions that maybe you agree with most of his policies, maybe you disagree with most of his policies, and maybe it's about a mix and match, maybe you agree with some of them and you disagree with other ones. So I'd love to hear your personal thoughts about what you think about each of these policies down in the comments below. But the idea really is that the first policy he really wants to implement is essentially doing no tax on tips. I personally think that if I had to give my personal opinion, I think it would be a really great idea, because after all, we do pay a lot less taxes, especially if you happen to be a worker who works off of tips. But I do also think it's really important to mention is that this is something that can be relatively easy to abuse, because if an employer really wanted to play into the game as well, what an employer can potentially do is essentially set a situation where they will essentially pay you near minimum wage, but beyond minimum wage, almost every other kind of income they will give you is purely off of tips. So what this is going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of people that are currently collecting tip income, and because of this reason they're going to massively benefit from it. But also the other big thing I think it's really important to notice is that a lot of the income that we currently see in our country that's in the form of tips actually comes in the form of cash. Cash is a very, very easy form of income to be able to slide a little bit under the table, in the sense that there's a lot of tipped income inside of our country that already goes unreported. So what do I mean? What's the significance about this is that I think while this might be a really great idea for a lot of people that work off of tip income, I think it's also important to notice that this might not be as super impactful as a lot of the other policies we're going to mention, because the reality is that a lot of tip income in our country is already untaxed. It's not supposed to be that way, but the reality is that a lot of it really does go under the table and goes unreported, because it's very easy to hide tip income, especially in the form of in the form of cash. So there are a lot of people that are now receiving tip income even in the form of like digital payment, obviously, because we have technology payment today. We have things like Apple Pay, Square, credit cards have been around for years and years. But for cash specifically, this is something that people have already been doing, so I think that this is just something to note about it. Now, the next policy that he really wants to try to implement is going to be no taxes on Social Security income. And this is the part that I think would be really, really life-changing for a lot of people. And feel free to, again, leave your comments down below about what you think about this. But I personally think this is going to be one of the more life-changing policies to know, especially if you know someone or you yourself is currently collecting Social Security. Because the reality is that inside of our country, we already pay a lot of money towards Social Security when we are working at our regular day jobs, otherwise known as Social Security tax. So it only makes sense that we should not have to pay taxes, because if we are paying taxes on Social Security, then we're literally paying taxes when we work our regular jobs to collect Social Security, and then we pay taxes again when we actually get our Social Security. So in other words, what this means is that the current system that we are currently living in right now makes it in a way so that we are literally essentially paying taxes 2 times for the same exact thing. We are paying taxes to potentially get Social Security, and then we pay taxes again when we actually get Social Security. Well, under this brand new policy, it's going to eliminate that final second tax that you'd have to pay. So now you only have to pay taxes when you're working your regular jobs towards Social Security, but when you actually receive your Social Security, you will no longer have to pay taxes towards that. And I think that's going to be some relatively life-changing news for anybody that's either currently or is going to or knows somebody that collects Social Security. And I think this is one of the bigger ones that I think is relatively great news. But of course, like mentioned, feel free to leave your comments down below. Now, the next policy that we really have to talk about is essentially no income tax on overtime pay. Now, this one I think is also going to be life-changing as well, but this one's a little bit trickier to kind of figure out how it's going to work or develop a system for, because right now at this time period, we obviously have to pay taxes on every kind of income, and I think that by trying to create a system where we no longer tax overtime pay, it might actually be a really great thing, because it will incentivize a lot of people to now work harder. It will create more productivity in our economy and inside of our country, especially because we are in a really rough economy right now with everything going on, from like inflation, interest rates, the job market, and everything in that world. So by doing no taxes on overtime pay, it not only incentivizes people to essentially work harder in their jobs, but at least it also becomes a way that people can now make a lot more money and sustain, especially with how expensive everything has gotten over the last couple of years. If you hopefully relate to that, maybe smash the like button, because I totally relate to that as well, especially because I also have seen so many things go up skyrocketing in prices in just my regular daily life that has made things very, very difficult to pay for things like bills, necessities, food, groceries, and everything in that world. But I will say one note about this policy is that this policy might be one of those that's a little bit trickier to kind of implement, because it would be very, very easy, especially there's a lot of people that work jobs where they're paid at a day rate. I'm guilty for this because at my regular job working in the film industry, I'm also paid at a day rate, that it's very easy for someone to essentially abuse this. And maybe I'll make a future video clarifying why, but it's very easy for someone to essentially, what they can do is that the typical hourly rate that they're currently working at right now, they can essentially slice that income or slice that rate in half and work a longer shift, essentially taking there's time to work a longer period of a shift in order to make the same amount of money, but claim that extra money as overtime pay to essentially pay less taxes. If this sounds a little bit confusing, I think it's going to be a lot more easier to explain on paper, but maybe that'll be a future video for another day, so maybe subscribe if that's of interest. But the bottom line is that there's a lot of ways to manipulate your income to pay less taxes under this new policy of no overtime pay. And that's the big takeaway behind this. Now, the next policy that we really have to talk about is essentially no/reduce taxes on made in America products. This one is a little bit more interesting and is only going to be relatable to certain people, but specifically especially business owners that maybe have to manufacture products in just our country. But the idea behind this one, made in America products, is that essentially he wants to create a system where when it comes to doing business or buying products that are made in America, you will essentially be able to buy those products for less taxes. So what this is essentially meant to do is that what this policy is that it's meant to encourage people to try to do more things or create more business inside of our own home country in America. Right now at this time, if you guys have seen from a lot of videos that we've made in the past, which I'll also put at the end screen so you can watch it after you watch this video, the idea is that many of the products that we buy inside of, or that we sell inside of America, they're actually purchased from outside of the country. There's a lot of products that we buy from China, from Canada, from Mexico, that we essentially import into America to sell. But what this policy is that it's a little bit of an extension of his tariffs policy, the policies that we've made over his tariffs, where he wants to essentially lower taxes for goods that are purchased inside of America. And that's really where this policy comes into play. Now, the next policy that we really have to talk about is a really, really quick one, but pretty much he wants to eliminate tax breaks for billionaires who own sports teams. This is a very straightforward one. We won't go into as much detail because I don't think most people watching this are billionaires. You know, at the end of the day, maybe comment down below if you are a billionaire or know a billionaire. I personally don't think I personally know a lot of billionaires. I know a lot of millionaires, but I definitely don't know a lot of billionaires. But the idea really behind this is that this one is just, if you're a billionaire and you own a sports team, there are a lot of loopholes that you can get away with paying tons and tons of taxes. This is going to essentially eliminate those loopholes, so now you have to pay your fair share of taxes. That's basically the bottom line takeaway behind this one. Now, the next policy that and this is the one that I think we really have to cover, is essentially back in 2017, there was a tax act called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And what this essentially did is that it lowered taxes for a lot of people over his entire presidency and over the next couple of years to allow us to essentially pay less taxes. So what's really, really nice is that I think a lot of people don't realize is that we all want to have tax breaks where we can pay less taxes. But back during President Donald Trump's, first term, he actually already approved the tax cut policy where he reduced taxes, income taxes for a lot of us in general. What this new policy is that essentially this is just going to take the policy that he already approved in 2017, which is now set to expire in the end of 2025, and essentially extend it now further into 2026 and beyond as well. This is essentially the same exact tax policy that we've already had for several years now, but just extended even longer now. So why this is going to be really nice and why this is important to notice is that because if Donald Trump does not approve his tax policies or doesn't get his tax policies approved, it's not that we're going to be paying the same amount of tax, but the reality is that because if we let these tax cuts expire and he doesn't approve an extension, what this is going to essentially do is make it so that now we have to actually pay even more taxes now than we are already currently paying at our regular day jobs. And so under this policy, this is going to make it so that now these tax cuts can now extend even further. And so now we can continue, paying the same amount or even less taxes if he approves even more tax cuts on top of this extension. And then probably the last tax policy that I really want to talk about, even though there's so many, and maybe we'll make a part 2 to this video if that's of interest. Maybe consider subscribing and hitting the bell if you guys haven't done so already. But the last tax policy we're really going to cover is really about the SALT cap. Essentially, SALT, S-A-L-T, like the salt that you put in your food, it stands for state and local taxes. And all this is that all you have to know about it is that essentially there was a cap to how much you can be taxed under this policy, and he wants to essentially raise that cap for people to pay less taxes. And that's really the story behind it. So it's a very, very straightforward. Feel free to leave any questions down below if there's anything that you guys want clarified. But the idea really is that hopefully will cover most of the tax policies, that at least certainly the big important ones that he currently has planned, that he's trying to approve in 2025 and have implemented in 2026 and beyond for the rest of his term. But as always, of course, hopefully that clarifies all of his not all, but most of his main tax policies and points. If you guys found that relatively insightful and watched to the end, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, like, comment, subscribe. Feel free to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, what you think about any of these policies. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. As always, stay safe, stay well, and hope to see you guys next time. Thank you guys so much again.